The wind howls across a burning city, and from the black horizon, thunder isn't from the sky. It's hooves. You stand on a crumbling wall as dusk bleeds into night. Below, fire devours the streets where children once played. Roofs collapse like dying lungs, spitting sparks into the smoky air. In the distance, a sound grows, steady, relentless, like a heartbeat that isn't yours. Hooves. Hundreds. No. Thousands. The Mongols are coming. Their banners, ink black and tattered, slice through the crimson sunset. Dust swirls around their cavalry like a storm's vanguard. They do not sing. They do not shout. Their silence is colder than the wind itself. You feel it settle into your bones, a silence that has crossed mountains, rivers, and nations. A silence that ends civilizations. The Mongol Empire, the largest contiguous empire in human history. It was born from the endless steppes of Central Asia, where survival itself was a brutal teacher. What rose from that desolation was not merely an army. It was a storm of steel and fury, commanded by a man the world would come to know as Genghis Khan. History remembers the Mongols for their genius in warfare, their speed, their unmatched unity. But buried beneath the songs of conquest lies another story, the forbidden history of those who fell into their hands, a history written not with ink, but with the screams of the conquered, and among those voices, the cries of women echo the loudest. Tonight, we strip away the romanticized image of Genghis the Conqueror. We step into the shadows between battles, into the homes where torches burned before soldiers arrived. We ask the question few dare to confront: what truly happened to the women who were captured by the Mongols? The Mongol expansion was not a single campaign. It was a wave, rising from the heart of the steppe and crashing against kingdoms from China to the Caspian Sea. Imagine stand-ins, on the walls of Nishapur or Merv as those waves approached, dust darkening the sky, riders appearing like mirages, their approach so sudden it felt like the earth itself had betrayed you. For the medieval world, these horsemen were more than enemies. They were a force of nature, unpredictable, unstoppable, and merciless. And yet, every empire has a beginning. Far away, on the open steppes where grass stretches like a green ocean, a boy named Temujin endured a childhood carved by hunger and betrayal. His father was poisoned by rivals, his family abandoned, left to starve in the wilderness. Temujin learned early that mercy was a weakness the steppe did not forgive. Each betrayal hardened him. Each winter storm carved away hesitation until only iron remained. When Temujin grew into Genghis Khan, he carried those scars into conquest. His rise wasn't just strategic, it was personal. Each city he burned, each throne he shattered, carried echoes of the injustices he'd suffered. And in his war machine, cruelty wasn't a byproduct, it was a weapon. Picture the moment before a city fell, the defenders exhausted, the gates splintering, women clutching children in candlelit rooms, listening as the battering rams thudded closer. The Mongols offered a choice: surrender and be spared temporarily, or resist and face utter annihilation. Many resisted. Few survived. The Mongols struck with terrifying precision. Their armies moved like rivers of horseflesh, their strategies honed by years of steppe warfare. They encircled cities, cut supply lines, and waited. But when they entered, the storm broke. Medieval chroniclers from Persia, China, and the Islamic world describe scenes that haunt history's memory. Streets clogged with corpses, wells filled with blood, markets turned into sorting grounds for captives. And among those captives, women were classified not as people, but as resources, spared for labor or court service. The rest, their fates are often sealed by a single, indifferent glance. Some are enslaved, marched away into the endless steppe. Others simply vanish. This system wasn't improvised. It was deliberate, efficient. The Mongols understood that domination extended beyond the battlefield. It reached into bloodlines, households, and memories. And yet, amid the horror, there is a terrible brilliance to their strategy. Terror itself was a weapon sharper than any blade. By spreading stories of unimaginable brutality ahead of their armies, stories often true, they shattered resistance before battles even began. Cities surrendered out of fear of what might happen to their women and children. And when cities resisted, the Mongols made sure that the consequences would be remembered for generations. This is why entire regions, Central Asia, the Khwarezmian Empire, parts of Persia, fell with shocking speed, not just because of military genius, but because fear itself rode with the Mongols. Fear of fire, fear of slaughter, fear of what awaited women once the gates fell. As you watch the riders approach in the darkness, you begin to understand the scale of what is coming. This is not just an invasion. It is the rewriting of the world's map, and the lives of millions will be caught in its wake. The Mongol Empire would stretch from the Pacific to the Black Sea, swallowing kingdoms, erasing dynasties, and redrawing history itself. And for the women of those lands, the arrival of the horde marked the end of one life and the beginning of another. One lived under the shadow of conquest. This is only the beginning. What forged these horsemen into such instruments of power and cruelty? How did the endless steppe shape the minds that would change the world? To answer that, we must ride back, before the empires, before the banners, to the harsh cradle of the Mongol Wa, Shafra machine. The night on the burning city fades. The wind that once carried smoke now sweeps across endless plains, cold, sharp, and wild. Here, beneath a sky so vast it swallows everything, the story of the Mongol storm truly begins. Imagine standing on the Eurasian steppe in the dead of winter. There are no walls to protect you, no cities to hide behind, only grasslands stretching to the horizon, snow biting at your skin, and winds so fierce they seem to scrape the very soul from your bones. This is where the Mongol war machine was born, not in marble halls, but in a land that punishes the weak and rewards only the ruthless. Before there were empires, there were tribes, clans scattered like drifting seeds across the steppe. Life here was raw, stripped to its most brutal form. Every sunrise was a negotiation with death. The land offered little, brief summers of green pastures, long winters of starvation. You wake each morning not knowing if your horses will survive the night, if rival clans will raid your camp, or if a sudden snowstorm will erase everything you've built. Children learned to ride before they could walk. Bows were placed in their hands before they could speak in full sentences. Mercy was a luxury none could afford. If you faltered, you died. Scarcity forged resilience. Tribal wars over pastures, water, and honor were constant. Violence wasn't exceptional. It was routine. It shaped their worldview, loyalty to your kin, indifference to outsiders, suspicion toward everyone else. Among these tribes, in 1162, a child was born near the Onon River. His name was Temujin. His life would become the spine of a legend. But at first, it was nothing but struggle. Temujin's father, Yasuge, was a respected chieftain, but when Temujin was just 9, Yasuge was poisoned by rivals during a feast. With his father gone, the family's fragile alliances shattered. They were abai, dunned by their own clan, left to starve in the freezing steppe. Imagine this. A young boy, his mother, and his siblings scraping bark off trees to survive, fishing through frozen rivers with bare hands. Hunger was their daily companion. Raiders attacked, taking their few possessions. Even their horses, their lifeline, were stolen. Temujin saw the world not as a place of fairness, but as a battlefield where only the cunning and ruthless endure. His childhood was carved in betrayal and cold nights. Every injustice burned a mark into his mind. These scars would shape not only the man he became, but the empire he would build. As Temujin grew, he navigated the labyrinth of tribal politics with lethal brilliance. He forged alliances, broke others, and learned to command loyalty through both charisma and fear. The Mongols were not a single people then. They were fragmented, constantly feuding. Temujin's genius lay in turning this chaos into unity. He introduced laws, the yasa, a brutal but effective code. It demanded discipline, rewarded loyalty, and crushed dissent. Under him, warriors who once fought each other began riding under one banner. But unity alone wasn't what made them terrifying. It was how the harshness of their world had prepared them for war. Picture a Mongol rider, lean, weathered, eyes narrowed against the wind. He can ride for days without fire, surviving on dried meat and fermented mare's milk. His horse is small but incredibly tough, able to gallop across deserts, rivers, and mountains with minimal rest. Each rider carries multiple bows, a saber, a lasso, sometimes even spare horses trailing behind. In battle, they strike fast and vanish faster. Their lives on the steppe have made them masters of endurance and deception. When you grow up hunting across vast plains, ambushing rival camps, and surviving winters that kill entire herds, you don't just learn tactics, you become the tactic. Temujin understood this deeply. He transformed survival skills into military doctrine. Speed and mobility replaced brute force. Psychological warfare broke enemies before swords did. Strict discipline made his armies function like a single living organism. No other medieval army moved like the Mongols. They didn't drag supply trains. They lived off the land, off their herds, off sheer endurance. The steppe was their training ground, their ally, their forge. But conquest was never just strategy for Temujin. It was personal vengeance, sharpened into destiny. He remembered every betrayal from his youth. He knew the sting of powerlessness, the taste of hunger, the weight of being abandoned. When he united the tribes and declared himself Genghis Khan, universal ruler, it wasn't just a political move. It was the fulfillment of a lifetime of fury and ambition. Under his banner, the tribes that once struggled to survive began to look outward, to kingdoms, to cities, to empires fat with wealth, guarded by walls they believed were impregnable. And Genghis Khan knew something those kingdoms didn't. Walls can't stop a storm. Imagine the mindset of those first Mongol armies. For generations, they had lived at the mercy of the land. Now, for the first time, they had a unified purpose and a leader who turned their suffering into strength. They rode out not as mere raiders, but as an unstoppable force. Every hardship they had endured became a weapon in their hands. Their discipline, born from a lifetime of survival, made them terrifyingly efficient. They struck where enemies were weakest, moved faster than news could travel, and exploited every fracture in enemy defenses. Entire armies vanished beneath their charges before kings even knew what had happened. This is the origin of the Mongol war machine, not forged in wealth, but in desperation, not trained in academies, but in storms, hunger, and endless battles for survival, not inspired by ideology, but by a man who turned his personal pain into a blueprint for conquest. The world beyond the steppe would soon learn to fear these riders, but they would never truly understand them. Because to understand the Mongols, you must first understand the cold nights Temujin spent staring into darkness, vowing never to be powerless again. As the tribes ride together for the first time, their horses pounding like war drums across the plain, you can almost feel history shifting beneath your feet. The storm has gathered, and soon it will strike the first cities. Before the flames, the wind seems to whisper, there was hunger, and hunger made conquerors. The storm has gathered. Across the steppe, the thunder of hooves rolls like a dark tide, and at the empire's fragile edges, cities that have stood for centuries begin to feel an unfamiliar tremor, fear. You find yourself standing at the walls of Nishapur, an ancient Persian city famed for its scholars, poets, and bustling markets. The air is thick with the scent of spices and baked bread. Merchants haggle, children chase each other through narrow streets. Life here has flowed undisturbed for generations, sheltered by high walls and the confidence that no rider could cross the vast deserts to reach them. But today, the horizon is strange. A brown haze rises in the distance. At first, people think it's a sandstorm, but the pattern is too deliberate, the line too sharp, and then the sound reaches you, low at first, like distant drums, then growing steadily louder. Hooves, again that sound, unrelenting, measured, inhumanly synchronized. The Mongols have arrived. These are the first encounters between the civilized cities of Central Asia and the newly unified Mongol war machine. To the Mongols, these walls are challenges. To the cities, the horsemen are phantoms out of legend, too fast and merciless to comprehend. Their first campaigns began against Xixia in northern China. Temujin tested his army. Against fortified towns, learning how to crack cities like eggs, they adapted siege weapons, recruited engineers from conquered lands, and perfected the art of psychological terror. But their most infamous early confrontations came when they turned west, toward the Khwarezmian Empire. In 1218, Genghis Khan sent a trade caravan to the Khwarezmian city of Otrar, hoping to open diplomatic and commercial relations. The governor, suspecting the merchants of espionage, executed them and seized their goods. This was a fatal mistake. Genghis Khan responded not with diplomacy, but with an invasion of fury. He led an army estimated at over 100,000 across deserts thought impassable, moving with shocking speed. City after city watched the dust clouds approach, unable to believe what was coming. The Mongols struck first at Bukhara and Samarkand, jewels of Islamic civilization. Chroniclers describe their arrival like a natural disaster, silent horsemen surrounding the city at dawn, cutting every road, every exit, moving with frightening precision. Their strategy was simple, but devastating. Encircle completely, sever communication and supply, offer surrender, unleash total destruction on resistance. At Nishapur, Herat, Merv, the pattern repeats. You stand beside terrified citizens watching as the Mongol vanguard fans out like a hunting pack. Scouts disappear within hours, messengers never return. Suddenly the city feels smaller, its walls less like protection and more like a cage. Inside, panic spreads, markets close, wells are fortified, women whisper prayers behind locked doors, rumors spread like wildfire. They ride at night, they don't eat or sleep, they kill everyone, and some of it is true. The Mongols never attacked recklessly. They waited, observed, starved cities into submission. Their patience was terrifying, and when they finally struck, they struck everywhere at once. Through gates blasted by siege engines, over walls scaled with ladders, under cover of volleys so thick the sky turned black. Herat's defenders fought bravely. For 7 days they resisted, believing help would arrive from neighboring cities. None did. When the gates finally fell, the Mongols poured in like water through a breach. The slaughter was methodical. Streets became rivers of blood. Chroniclers wrote that, for days the city lay silent except for the cries of the dying, and then came the sorting. Women were separated from men. The young and beautiful were reserved for the Khan's officers or Genghis Khan himself. Skilled women, scribes, artisans, midwives, were catalogued like valuable tools. The rest faced enslavement or execution. It wasn't chaotic, it was organized, a human assembly line of fate. Imagine it. You are pulled from the arms of your family, forced into a square where Mongol soldiers stand in rows. You see women herded into different groups by silent gestures. One woman is dragged aside by her hair. Another is lifted onto a horse and disappears into the night. Behind you, men are being beheaded one by one, their bodies tossed into heaps. There are no negotiations, no explanations, only cold procedure. For the Mongols, this was conquest at its most efficient. For the captives, it was the sudden collapse of reality itself. Merv suffered one of the worst fates. Once a prosperous center of learning, it was betrayed by its governor's poor strategy. When the Mongols breached the walls, they executed nearly the entire population. Some Persian sources claim more than 700,000 people died in Merv alone. Modern historians debate the number, but all agree on the scale of the destruction. Women and children were not spared. Many were enslaved, taken east across the steppe, their names erased from history. The psychological impact was immense. Cities that had once stood proud now whispered ghost stories. Walls that had defied armies for centuries now crumbled. E4 riders who came from nowhere and vanished just as quickly. This wasn't just warfare, it was psychological domination. Genghis Khan understood that terror could conquer faster than armies. He allowed survivors to flee, not out of mercy, but to carry tales of horror to the next city. And they did. They spoke of entire towns annihilated, women sorted like livestock, children slain without hesitation. By the time the Mongols reached the next city, fear had already done half the work. For the women of Nishapur, Merv, and Herat, these encounters marked the beginning of a new, brutal existence. Some were taken as wives or concubines into Mongol households. Others became servants or slaves in distant camps. Many simply vanished into the vast steppe, their fates unrecorded, their voices silenced. What they shared was the abrupt shattering of their world. In a single day, they went from daughters, wives, and mothers to captives, spoils, or ghosts in history's margins. As night falls over Nishapur, you walk through the aftermath. The city that buzzed with life in the morning now lies silent. Torches flicker on walls slick with blood. Somewhere a baby cries, then is quickly silenced. Mongol riders patrol the streets, their silhouettes merging with the smoke. The storm has passed, but the silence it leaves is worse than the noise. The walls did not fall, whispers history. They were unmade. These early encounters sent shockwaves through Asia. Kingdoms that once mocked the barbarian horsemen now scrambled to negotiate, surrender, or flee. But for many, it was already too late. The Mongols had perfected their method, and soon they would refine it even further, not just capturing cities, but building a systematic machinery to process, classify, and control the conquered. The wind moves differently now. It no longer howls with the fury of conquest. It whispers. Faint, cold, endless. You stand upon the empty steppes, where once the hooves of 1,000 riders shook the earth. Now, only silence remains.